Welcome to Soberly Speaking. I'm Julia Rangiheuea. You might know Kate Forster for her sharp TikTok opinions, but who was she before becoming a popular author and our favourite fashion critic? In this episode, we revisit Kate's childhood, growing up with a father battling severe alcoholism, how his struggles led to multiple suicide attempts, one she witnessed firsthand, and how alcohol ultimately took his life just 11 weeks after his diagnosis. Kate reflects on the complexities of loving a parent with addiction, how they can be our entire universe, whilst still acknowledging the wounds they left us with, ones we carry for life. This is a conversation about love, loss, and the lasting impact of addiction, told with the raw honesty Kate is known for. Trigger warning, we discuss themes of substance abuse and suicide in this episode. I hope you love this chat with Kate Forster. Kate, when I was doing my research on you, now I follow you regardless.
Thank you.
I was trying to look for any sort of backstory I could get or anything about your life prior to TikTok really, and I couldn't find anything. So props to you. With Soberly Speaking, we always start at childhood. Mm-hmm. What was your childhood like?
Well, I grew up with an alcoholic father, a very severely alcoholic, cupboard drinking father, which I don't know if your listeners are familiar with that term, but, you know, he would hide the alcohol and it kind of, I had a very nice childhood up until his drinking really kicked off. And in hindsight, I personally think it was because my parents tried to upgrade their life and it was a lot of pressure on him. Mm-hmm. And he worked overseas a lot. So, and I think that drinking, he worked on oil rigs. So I think that drinking culture, Singapore, raffles, the expat kind of life was really conducive to that as well. But it was really damaging to grow up around that. It was heartbreaking to watch that battle for him.
Mm-hmm. What is a specific memory that you have tied to his drinking?
Oh, fuck, I've got so many. So many. I think it was, for me, it was being quite young and finding alcohol around the side of the house and pouring it out and going, I just don't want you to drink today. And then no one would mention it. So for me, that was really sad, and watching my mum struggle with trying to get him help. And there was no help really. You know, I was born 1971, so there was only AA and just don't drink. You know, that wasn't really a feasible support system for him. He didn't really get help until he was about 60, I think. And then they said your actual drinking is a symptom of a mood disorder.
Wow.
So we got the mood disorder treated, and then the drinking kind of just settled.
And what do you remember from their marriage? What was their dynamic like?
Well, I think, you know, my psychiatrist once said to me that a lot of partners of alcoholics have the same traits of the alcoholics without the actual addiction. So I think, you know, I think my mum tried her best, but, you know, she was a nurse. So she was like, I'll just try and fix it. But it was so profound and there was such a little support. And I grew up in a, you know, upper middle class environment, private schools, both, you know, I've come from a long history of family involved in private schools. So there was a real sort of face to keep up. You know, I grew up in Bayside, Melbourne. It was tennis parties and, you know, all the right people, and you just didn't talk about it. You just, you know, my mother would say, you do not tell people what's happening outside of here. And it was actually when I went to a new school in the city. I'd been at a school called Furbank, which is very, very girly, and, you know, then we moved, and then I ended up going to Wesley College, which was quite a progressive kind of school. And I had teachers say to me one day, what's going on at home, Katie? And I went, what do you mean? And he was the most beautiful teacher. And he said, something's going on at home. And I just lost it. I just said, I'm dealing with a father this is what's happening. And he said, we run a lunchtime group for kids whose parents are alcoholics if you want to come along.
So that's how prevalent it was.
Mm-hmm. So I went to this group, and there were kids in there that were like the cool girls, like the parents were the coolest, artsy, cool parents. And all these kids were struggling with one of their parents having an addiction.
Did you have siblings?
Yep. And both of them, I would probably say were affected by it. It really affected my relationship with my dad. I think my sister and my brother are a lot closer to him than I was, because I really struggled with the concept of why can't you just stop for us? Mm-hmm. So I would call it out. I would hear when the door would open and hear his voice and go, oh, fuck, we're in for it tonight.
You knew.
You can hear that change. And also, people say, oh, you're really great at reading patterns, or you can tell when people are not right. And it's like, I grew up like that. It's not a sixth sense. Mm-hmm. It's me going, fuck, I have to eat my dinner as fast as I can and get to my bedroom. Mm. And if it kicks off, I was the one who would call the police, and then I'd get into trouble.
Because was there violence?
Yeah, but I wouldn't say that he was the violent one. I would say that there was frustration in the house. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it's sad because he was actually a fucking great bloke. So he ended up getting pancreatic cancer, which turned, liver pancreatic cancer, and that is from the drinking. Mm-hmm. And I was like, that's why I stopped drinking.
Yeah. What were you like as a child?
Oh, well, I would vacillate between trying to be as perfect as possible. So I was a very high achiever from a very early age, because I thought if I got to be, prefect at Wesley and all of those things, and I got to be in all the musicals and I got really high marks, then that would make him stop. Oh. So I just became the overachiever girl. And then I was also problematic at home because I would call it out.
What order are you and the siblings?
I'm the middle child. I'm the problem child.
How does having an alcoholic father, obviously he's the number one male figure in your life, how does that set you up of how you view men in the world?
Well, I think because he wasn't a terrible person, he wasn't awful. He the main person who he hurt was himself first and foremost, and he did. He really did. He tried to kill himself a few times. Like it was a significant traumatic environment to grow up in. But mostly it was his pain. You could just see he just couldn't balance those mood swings and the pressure on him to maintain the facade, I think. For him, my parents ended up moving to the country, and they had this beautiful garden it was a National Trust garden, and it was beautiful. So and he really threw himself into that. I definitely was mindful of men with substance issues. So I've been married for 900 years, right? And my husband grew up with an alcoholic mother.
Interesting.
Yeah, so we both went, hello, I see you, I see that. And she was really bad and violent and abusive and all of those things. And he's had to do a lot of work around reconciling that and forgiving her. And she died of very early of lung cancer because she was a very heavy smoker. And so we both... It's interesting that both of our therapists have said to us individually, it's amazing that you both didn't end up alcoholics. You either go one way or the 100%. Other, right? Mm-hmm. We don't drink at home. He will have a glass of wine sometimes.
Wow, so he doesn't have that addictive personality.
No. The only thing was that he went through a bit of a shit time at work a couple of years ago, and he was going out and drinking a lot with friends from work and coming home, and I was like, this is not good. And then he was like, oh no, I'm actually really hate my job. I went,
there we go.
So Yeah, my daughter is the same. She's had periods of going, oh, this is borderline. But she's interesting because she's 28 and she was saying that she thinks so many of the people in her world have alcohol issues because they drink alone. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I always said to her growing up was never drink alone. Mm-hmm. Don't have a drink alone, you know. And she's lived alone since she was 18 or 19. So she said she would hear me going, drinking is a social thing if you're going to do it, you know. Mm. So she's pretty good at being able to say no now. But she remembers, you know, my dad when she was very young, he was still drinking then. So, you know, it was hard. And I set boundaries for my daughter around my parents that they wouldn't have set for me. Mm-hmm. So, for example, I was going up to Sydney to see a girlfriend and my daughter was only 18 months and I said I was going to leave her with my parents and I got there and my dad was drunk and I said, and I rang my girlfriend on my little Nokia at the time and I said, can I bring her? And she went, fuck yeah, don't worry about it. Come on. So I said, sorry, I'm not leaving her here. And it was like I had caused World War III. I think I had caused World War III. I said, I am not leaving my 18-month-old daughter with my father in this condition. You cannot keep her safe. And I don't want her seeing him like this because she adores him. And that was a huge thing that I did, but did it make any difference? No.
You're obviously sitting here talking to me about it from such a healed state. What age were you when you can look back on your father's actions and know that he was so sick with that illness, with addiction?
It took me a long time. I don't think I started healing till he got the diagnosis of the mood disorder. And I remember going to see him at the Melbourne clinic and he was like, you know, they started to medicate him and properly had a really good psychiatrist. And I was like, oh, there you are. You know, I hadn't seen that for a long time. My father and I had a difficult relationship because I did call out the bullshit, which I'm known for getting in trouble for. This is not news. I've been doing this my whole fucking life.
You stayed on brand.
But he was also supremely proud of me, and he thought I was the funniest thing ever. Like I would just, and he would just think I'm so funny. And he used to say that he didn't worry about me. I remember when he was in ICU towards the end of his life in Bendigo and I went to see him and we were talking about everything and he said, you know, I'm worried about your sister and I'm worried about your brother, but I'm not worried about you. And I didn't take that as an offence because I think he knew that I will make shit happen. And he was incredibly proud of my writing. So I'm glad he got to see that, you know, got to see all the book deals and those things. But I think at the very end of his life, he wasn't someone who was able to easily communicate his emotions, you know. So he didn't have any of those big conversations.
I was going to ask that, if you had any coming to Jesus moments.
No, he didn't. The only thing he said to me at the end was he could go into palliative care or he could die at home. And I said, what do you want to do? And, of course, he said, whatever's easiest for your mum. And I said, well, would you like to be here? He said, yeah. And I said, okay. But it's hard, you know. I sat in that meeting with the head pancreatic surgeon from the Austin, and he basically runs Pancare, and he said, this is from drinking. So that's just horrific. But my reason really for stopping drinking was that I got a test to see what kind of genetic abnormalities I have.
Wait, what age were you when you got this test?
50.
Okay.
So that's only been a couple of years. And, you know, it'll tell you if you've got the breast cancer gene or all of those things, and it came back with you have pancreatic and liver abnormalities and you need to stop drinking. And so my grandmother died of pancreatic cancer. My father died of pancreatic cancer. I have liver issues. And I went, oi, I need to stop drinking right now. Not even a glass. Not even a glass. You don't know what it is going to be that's going to tip that cell. And, you know, pancreatic cancer is incurable. There is no treatment. people, can have the Whipple surgery or whatever, but they will still probably get it back. It's very, very unsurvivable. It's like a glioblastoma, basically, and you get diagnosed very late. So my father died 11 weeks from diagnosis.
Whoa.
Yeah, it was horrendous. And he smoked. So smoking, drinking together, obviously, esophageal, bile duct cancer, pancreatic cancer. They're pretty unsurvivable. And it's a shit-ass death. And I thought, I don't want that. Whatever I can do to stop that, if it means that I can't have a glass of something, then fine, I won't.
Yeah, because up until this time, were you just a social drinker?
Yeah, I love champagne. I love really good champagne, and I love a tall gin and tonic. Like, I love it. They're my favourite. So and my son is a smellier, so I'm like, oi. But I just don't now, and I think it is pretty normalized now in my world, more so. And also, despite that, I saw my son, particularly my son's generation, not my daughter's, a lot of his friends' parents, women, struggling with alcohol and normalising the wine o'clock at primary school. And one of the mums used to get so drunk she would pass out, and then this kid would ring Spike and, I'd say, well, he can come here, and it was all savvy boo this and savvy boo that. And I would sit there, and at the time I had a blog that was quite popular, and I did a post about, I'm really concerned about the women who are drinking like this. It's not normal, blah, blah, blah. And I got fucking reamed for it. Oh, you're so judgmental. And I'm like, no, but I can see it happening in the community. My son was in a Bayside football team, and he had a mum in his group who would come to training drunk, and my husband was managing at the time, and he's like, what do I do? And then you're going to embarrass the child, it's that.
Kate, can I tell you that is the number one person who writes into this podcast is the drunken, yummy mummy, those, especially the new mums who they just can't, come 5 p.m, they just go hell for leather. It's really opened my eyes to, first of all, how society views an addict.
Yep.
And just those people out there who, because of all the wine o'clock memes, they don't reach out for help because it's so normalised in new mums.
And it's your community. Particularly at the primary school that my son was at, it was very, Kate, come round, we're having wines. And I wasn't really drinking then. And, I've struggled a lot with it because I think that there's a point that you call me and you say, Kate, I'm really unwell. I have brain cancer. And I go, well, that's fucked. What can I do? I'll do whatever it takes. But I've realised that I have this judgment towards people. If you ring me and go, I smoke 80 cigarettes a day and I've got lung cancer. I'm like, So what did you think was happening? And I know that's judgmental of me, and I'm aware of it, and I try and hold it back. But part of me goes, if you know what the end of the road looks like, what are you doing as you walk it? Because if you are still drinking, if you are still smoking, I don't know. It's interesting because a friend of mine has started on one of the GLP-1 injections for weight loss, and she was a drinker and has stopped.
It stops your cravings.
She just goes, I don't even think about it. I don't want it. I don't think about it. And it's interesting because I was looking at her thinking, I think a lot of your weight is alcohol. Inflammation. They get that puffy look. And she's like, I just don't want it anymore.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to talk about how you parented your 2 beautiful kids and the communication around alcohol whilst they were growing up.
Yeah, I was pretty hardcore about it. And I don't think it made any difference.
Well, describe hardcore to me.
I don't want you drinking, and this is what I went through, and this is what your dad went through, and
It's in our blood. Yeah.
White noise. And then my daughter hit the alcohol pretty hard in year 11, pretty hard, like really badly to the point that I was concerned. Because one of her friends rang and said, you have to come and get her. I was like, oh, that's so embarrassing for you.
Yeah.
And so I put her on the phone to my dad. My dad was still alive then. It was a year before he died. He wasn't sick then. And I said, Dad, you have to tell my daughter. And he did. He gave her the fucking news. And he was like, my life has been, really dramatically affected by this. And if you're drinking like that, there's something else going on. And there was something else going on.
Always.
And then she kind of got through normal stuff, went to uni, and now she barely drinks at all and is quite mindful of it, but mostly because she said she wants to get up the next day and absolutely own her life. That feeling of just, I've got so much good stuff to do. It's an interesting thing. I grew up around drugs. My husband grew up around alcohol. There's sort of 6 years between us. So when I first met him, I was taking MDMA and weed and cocaine and all those normal fun. I didn't really drink. I was like, I don't drink. I just take MDMA. I was like,
you're superior to us.
And I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. There was nothing like it at the club. Nothing like it. It is the most fun you'll ever have, but it's manufactured fun. And that's what I've come to realise now is that, for my kids, being really hardcore with them and them having health issues that they just can't do that either, suddenly realising that it might be the greatest night of your life at the club, but it's AI. It's not real. It's not real. It's not real. And I talk a lot to my kids about snapshot moments, like when something really great happens, take that mental snapshot because you need to remember what that feels like, so you're searching for it again. And my son went out a while ago and he went out with a friend who is training to be a doctor, and he's sober as well, and they ended up going to a few jazz clubs and had dinner and all that, and we're out quite late. But my son said, God, I had such a good night, I said, that's real fun.
Do their friends do drugs and drink?
Yeah.
I was going to say, because they sound very mature for people in their 20s.
Well, they both started really young.
Yeah.
That's a difference. And we lived inner city Melbourne. My daughter had a fake ID and was at Rabs in year 10. I couldn't stop that. And I'd rather have known where she was, which was my theory. Just tell me where you're going. If you're going to be at 7 or wherever you are and you're having a disco, fine. They've both had their challenges though, and I think it's normal teenage challenges, but I probably overreact because I'm so anxious about the impact of alcohol.
What's your biggest trigger for that, going right back to your dad? Is it the smell of it? Is it hearing someone slur their words?
It's hearing someone slur their words. It's also, so the interesting thing about the smell is I remember accusing my father of drinking and him pleading with me to say he wasn't, and he was slurring his words. In hindsight, he was having a manic episode where the cortisol creates the same scent as alcohol and the slurring is from the mood disorder. And that's me kind of going, fuck, I feel really bad about that. But, I didn't know. Also, it's interesting. So a friend of mine's husband is in AA and is a coach and sponsor and all of those things. And I was saying to him, what makes an alcoholic, what constitutes an alcoholic? And he said to me, it's when your personality changes. So if you drink and you become a different person, you've got an alcohol problem, in his opinion. And for me, it's interesting because I do look at people in my life that I think maybe you've got an alcohol issue, and their personality changes. They're not just a fun version of Kate, a hyper chatty version of Kate. They there's a meanness, there's an edge.
The eyes change.
Yeah, there's a total change. The problem for me is addiction and alcohol or drugs or otherwise is that it feels like it is often a symptom.
1,000%.
You know?
You said in your childhood that you went the other way and you wanted to overachieve, essentially to get your father's love. Is your husband like that? Is he an overachiever too? Because it sounds like the wound is the same for you guys.
No, my husband was parentified. So he kind of raised his younger sister. There's 10 years because mum wasn't around. And it's an interesting thing because he sees his mother for who she was because he was the eldest. So he sees that really clearly, and maybe there's 4 kids don't see it as much or they don't want to admit it, but he's had a lot of therapy to kind of look at it and go, oh, that's just, not normal. In some ways his mother was horrendous, and in other ways she at moments had brilliance and saw what he was capable of and encouraged him to uni. She actually got a lot better when she had her first grandchild. That kind of switched something for her, and she'd behaved very badly at our wedding and we didn't see her for a year. Dave said, no, go and sort your shit out, and we'd had a baby in that time, and she came back and I never saw her drink at that level again. So I think that the stakes were too high for her. She had a couple of grandchildren that she was passionate about.
Did she behave badly at the wedding just due to alcohol?
Yeah, and I think, she was really unsocialized, no emotional regulation. She was really struggled as a person. So yeah, she didn't like me. So. Okay. She didn't like any of her daughter-in-laws, but it wasn't personal. It was just she didn't want anyone to be with her sons. But yeah, so my husband had kind of put that line down pretty young and went, no, it's not.
What a man.
Yeah. So
is he watching this new relationship with his mother and now his firstborn child? Is he watching that and that's healing his inner child, or is he watching that with envy?
What's funny, he said to me the other day, he's got a really bad memory, and he said to me, oh, I can't remember if I was a good dad or not. And I went, what is wrong with you? And I just pulled up my phone and went, well, here's you reading Richard Scarry, and here's you dressing up like that, and here's you doing that, because he didn't have that role model. He doesn't know. I know he was a good dad, yeah. And even when there were moments with my dad that are 50-50 because he was good, he absolutely showed up when he needed to. But at my wedding with my dad, I said to him, if you drink, it's done.
Yeah.
And he didn't drink on the day. So I was very proud of him to be able to do that. And he had a great time. He's dancing and doing all those things. But I said, you do not ruin my wedding.
When you're in situations like that with your father, like my hands are getting sweaty because my father has a drinking problem as well. Just thinking about it, I'm getting clammy. Are you just thinking, even if I'm talking to you, I'm thinking, what the hell's he doing? What the hell's he doing? Are you not present with the person in front of you if your dad is in the vicinity and he's drinking?
Well, there's a great story from Children of Alcoholics. I did a lot of Children of Al-Anon work online in my healing journey, and I suddenly realised so many of my dysfunctional behaviours was from growing up in an alcoholic family. And one of the things they talk about is having a giant cage, and it's the gorilla, which is the alcoholic parent, and the child. And the child is stuck in the cage with the gorilla and they can never leave. So my mother could come and go, my grandparents could come and go, but we're not allowed out of that cage with the parent. And until you do the work and you have the support system and the courage to walk out that door, and it won't happen until you're 18, some people never leave the cage. And so I ended up leaving that cage with the gorilla. I think my dad went in and out of rehab a lot, and the last time he went in, I went, I'm leaving the cage. And I'd had my daughter and I'd started seeing a therapist and blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll tell you something about my husband. We had met. I went back to Perth because I was at uni over there. We wrote letters like we were old-fashioned lovers. And I came back to Melbourne. We'd just moved in together, and my mum, they had lost money, and my mum said, I need to get him to rehab and don't have any money. And my 25-year-old husband pulled together money for my husband's rehab. I mean, for my father's rehab. And I went, oh, fuck, you're the one.
Yeah, I have to
God
marry you
damn
now.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. He just went, here you go, and gave my mum a check.
Was your dad, you know, your mum taking your dad to rehab, especially back in that time, it was just the thing that everyone did.
Yeah.
What did his rock bottoms look like?
Well, he tried to kill himself.
Mm-hmm.
So he drove to a quarry and you know, blocked up his exhaust and was found unconscious by some kids riding a bike there. And so he was resuscitated in the hospital for quite a while, but it was never spoken about. I only heard about it because I was at my grandparents listening through the door. I was always listening, always watching. And then I had to report back to my sister. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. I mean, there's some things that he did that I go, I know it was the addict and I know it was the unwell person, but I also go, fuck, mate, that was a shit thing to do. So that was a significant and real attempt, and he probably, I don't think, would have got the proper support that he needed because it was the 80s. No one really wanted to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think my mum got the support that she needed at all. I think my grandparents were like, you know, oh no, we cannot possibly deal with this. They took the children because that was what you would do. You would take the children from the place. But I think they blamed my mum for his illness, you know, and that was a real struggle for her. Yeah, like he made my best friend killed herself in the year after I finished school, and it was very sad and tragic. She'd hung herself, and I was devastated. And my dad decided to drink because he couldn't cope with my pain. And I screamed at him and said, I wish you'd done it. And then he took a rope and went to the front of our house. We lived on a big property in Mount Eliza, and he said he was going to kill himself. So it's that level of fuck me. Like, who does that?
Kate, where do you even begin to heal from something like that, from saying a throwaway comment to your father?
Yeah.
You know, you're in the depths of grief, saying, I just wish you'd kill yourself. I can imagine me saying that, and then him going and doing that. How do you forgive?
I moved to Perth.
Yeah.
I had to go a long way away. And it's interesting, when my parents said, what school do you want to go to? I chose a school that was as far away from home as I could get. I lived in Mount Eliza, and I chose to go to Wesley and St Kilda Road, and that was a fucking hike. And I was never home. Never home. And I had a boyfriend whose parents had a warehouse in the city, and he had his own floor. I was there every weekend. I would do whatever it took to stay out of the house. I got a job at 15 singing at a pub, the Carrington Bush. I sang in jazz clubs from a very early age. Whatever I could do to get out of that house, I would do. And so then I had 1 year at home after school, and then I got into Whopper and I went to Perth, and I just stayed there, came home, moved out with Dave. Like, as little time as possible as I could spend in the house. Because I would have the greatest of intentions, but they just couldn't do the work, you know, and we needed family therapy, and I don't think there was therapy then for that level. You know, I remember my dad reading a lot of Wayne Dyer after he'd come out of one of his rehab sessions, which I get. Like, you know, I went down that whole kind of hippie space as well, and it is good to self-actualize through that. But what he actually needed was a mood stabilizer. If we could just get that, and then you can read the Wayne Dyer. But he was also, this is going to sound so weird, he could also speak to the dead.
That doesn't sound weird to me. I'm very woo-woo.
Okay, right. So he could speak to the dead, and I think it really fucked with him headspace-wise. So we would go to a funeral and he would tell me what the person in the coffin was saying. He'd gone to India in very, very early 70s before it was trendy. Like I think he had this deep esoteric vault of light through him that he couldn't kind of actually manage. And when I did all my tests on the genetic stuff, we've got some really like Romany blood in us, you know, real, you know, weird old school sort of soothsayer blood on his side in particular. And a lot of people used to wonder if we were Indigenous, you know, like I couldn't find any evidence of that but there's definitely Romany blood in there. And my grandmother could, you know, find water with sticks.
Wow, yeah.
She couldn't wear a watch. It would turn off. Any watch she wore would just stop. And I think my dad had continual voices at him, continual energy. He was a really charismatic man. I think he had energy at him all the time, and he had zero personal boundaries to tell the voices to stop. And last year I read an interview with Alice Notley, who is a poet who lives in Paris. She's very old, but she talks about how she doesn't believe she's a writer. She just gets stories from the dead. They talk to her. Mm-hmm. And I've never resonated with something more, because when I write a book, it flows like you've never seen. It's like I'm a conduit. And I swear to God, these stories are happening elsewhere, and I just am scribing, literally scribing. And I think to my dad that when I put the pieces together and when I watched The Beach with Warwick Thornton, who is an Australian Indigenous cinematographer, he talks about his uncle who could speak to the dead. He was a medicine man in Indigenous culture, but he also was a drinker. And he said, I would watch him walk down the street in Alice Springs just talking like, and go, you know, Warwick's uncle's drunk again. And he'd go, no, it's the spirits. And he's drinking to stop the spirits. Mm-hmm. And I just wonder, you know, we medicalise everything, but sometimes I think we can read energy, and if you don't have good boundaries. Mm-hmm. I did a thing the other day on TikTok about when your boundaries are encroached or people step over your boundaries, you have energy leaks. Mm-hmm. You are leaking adrenaline, cortisol, you know, and it's really important that you reset after that. And the messages of people who are just telling me that's exactly what it is. Your energy has been absolutely smashed through with a boundary kind of breach, and then people go to, I'll just have a joint, I'll just have a line, I'll just, you know, do this or that, and suddenly it's gone to the shit.
Do you believe in that? Like, do you believe in the supernatural?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know if you did.
I don't even not believe in it. It's so real to me. Mm-hmm. So a friend of mine is a nuclear scientist, like for real. She works down at La Trobe. She also reads tarot, crystals.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, she's unbelievable. And I said, how do you balance that with this incredible knowledge of physics? And she said, but it's energy. It has to go somewhere.
Do you think you're so successful in this life because you're able to turn that power into good, and you have such good boundaries? I think that's why people are so attracted to you on TikTok.
I have terrible
you have no shit policy. That's the energy I feel. Like
I do, but I'm a sucker for a sad story. Mm. I will try and help wherever I can. I spent some of the weekend talking to a woman whose daughter has severe autism, and she's not getting any help, and I called a few friends to see if I could get her an OT, and she's on the other side of town. I've never met this woman, but I'm like, that sounds fucking terrible, and I know a lot of people, so I'll see what I can do. I don't know, my Chinese horoscope said that I have a lucky star over me, which is quite rare. There's a particular lucky star, I can't remember, but it was so spot on. And it also said that I wouldn't become successful until after 40. And I didn't publish my first book until 40. So
I know that this is not the point of the podcast, but can we touch on that? Sure. Finding success later in life. What is the main difference, apart from money, of your life now versus then?
Well, you're doing it for the wrong reasons. You know, there's a quote from George Clooney who says that if I'd found fame before 40, I'd be smoking cigarettes through a hole in my throat, you know? Like, fucking hell. I couldn't be trusted.
Yeah.
I was party girl central. I love spending money. I love buying shit. I love being the first with the latest. I love being interesting, and I am a Torres. I'm a pretentious wanker.
Yeah.
So I love that stuff. So I probably would have done it for the wrong reasons, and it would have been quite egotistical. And I've really had to catch myself when I go into ego state on social media to go, whoa, 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 pull it back, Katie. Why are you doing that? And I'll go, oh, I'm actually feeling a little bit vulnerable, or I'm feeling a bit whatever, and I'll just delete that post. Every time I haven't trusted that, it's gone to the shit. I'm like, fuck, should have, you know, the little voice goes, don't post that shit. And then suddenly you're like, but success, the funny thing is for me though, I've written 20 books with the most successful publishers in the world. Like, you know, I've done big strategies for things. No one knew about that. No one knows me here. Over there, it's, you know, in Europe and UK, it's incredibly, you know, I'm incredibly popular, but it's just not kind of a vibe here. For me, though, I think I had to go and do a lot of work before I was ready for it. And the stuff that does well for me is either me being funny or me saying, this is what I've learnt.
Yeah.
So someone like Mel Robbins is copping a lot of shit online at the moment because a lot of her stuff is actually repurposed from other therapists. And I'm really mindful to say, I'm not a therapist, I'm not qualified, but this is something that was taught to me and it might help some of you. And it does.
Do you know your human design?
Generator?
Yeah, but do you know like the 3?
No.
Because I'm a 3-5 and it sounds very similar to you that I actually have to live my life and fuck up so badly and then turn around to people and say, hey, this is what I've done. You should do it better. That's my actual life's purpose. We'll do this once we finish.
Yeah.
To wrap this interview up, I've loved learning about your backstory.
My trauma.
You are so captivating. I want to be a bit selfish and ask for some advice.
Yes.
Because I probably am where you were with your father. I think, well, I know if he keeps, you know, smoking a pack of cigs and living off Phoebes and bread and butter, there's only, like you said, it's written in the stars. It's where you know how this is going to end. If you could have a conversation with your father, one that still lingers above your head, what would that conversation entail?
I just would have told him I loved him more.
Oh.
Because that was his contract. In the hall of fucking souls or mirrors or whatever, they said, all right, Pete, you're going to do this, 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 and this is how it's going to affect that, and are you up for it? And he's gone, all right, guess I am. You can't change people's contracts. And for your dad, you can't change that. What you need to do is get ready for him to die, that anticipatory grief that you're going to experience, because you have to let go that you're probably not going to be able to change it. And that's really hard because you see the potential for him and what life could be like, but this is your turn.
Thank you so much for joining me on Soberly Speaking.
Namaste.